So, thank you very much. So our first speaker, now you can clap. So Jason, welcome to the stage. Hands together. I'm just going to mic you up, Jason. Here we go. Okay, mate. All yours.
Marvellous, thank you.
That's your, to the right.
To the right.
Yeah.
That's great. Lovely to see so many people in the room. My name's Jason, from this company here, Japanese Knotweed Expert. We're part of a larger group of companies, and we've been doing this for about 25 years now, just over. So we've got quite a lot of experience in dealing with Japanese knotweed, both from the point of view where we are killing it through chemicals, but also through excavation. But also, we were actually one of the first 5 companies in the UK to be qualified to the highest level. And up to 2 years ago, we were the only company that was recommended to solicitors and barristers when they were dealing with legal issues with Japanese knotweed. So one of our competitors is now on that list, scumbags. But nevertheless, we were the first there. So yeah, lots of experience. That's what I'm trying to say. How many of you guys have heard of Japanese knotweed? So, probably 95, 98% of the room. Brilliant. So, if you were buying a property, and it came upon the survey that there was Japanese knotweed, what would you do? Run away. Negotiate. The right answer. Give that man a gold star. No, but this gentleman that said run away. Any idea what percentage of people will walk away from a property where Japanese knotweed comes up on a survey? 99%? 95%? And this side's really into it. What about this side of the room? Go on. Nat. Is it Natalie? What do you think? Go on. Take a guess. We've got 99%. We've got 95%, I think somebody said. 92? You're right. It's 92%. You win. It took a little bit of coaxing. No, absolutely. So, 92% of people will walk away if Japanese knotweed comes up on a survey. What do you think that makes the seller? Do you think it makes them motivated to sell? If they've just lost 92% of their potential purchasers? And some of the surveys put it at 94%, by the way. I would have given you anything on it. But that's the majority of people, isn't it? Only 6 to 8 people out of 100 potential purchasers would actually consider buying that property once there's Japanese knotweed there. So yeah, you're looking at highly motivated people. So this particular talk's entitled How to Make Money Out of Japanese Knotweed. And I'm a big fan of making money on day one. I've got my own property portfolio. We've bought property that has Japanese knotweed. We bought a commercial unit where the Japanese knotweed was literally 1 metre from the wall. So we don't talk the talk, we walk the walk as well. So, and it's really interesting. Anybody know who said that? Warren Buffett. Well done, yeah. Can you see how that this is certainly the case with Japanese knotweed? When other people are fearful, there's money to be made if you know what you're doing. I'll add that caveat. If you know what you're doing. And there certainly is. We're going to talk about in a moment like what type of percentage you can expect to get off, but the range is huge about the money you can get knocked off a property because of Japanese knotweed. But there's also things you can do to get really close to your market valuation if you do have a property with Japanese knotweed. There's certain things you can do, and we'll touch on that as well. Anybody have any idea how much it costs to get rid of Japanese knotweed at the Olympic Park? So this was a few years back now, obviously. Take a guess. Nat, you were really good last time. This is your partner in the green t-shirt. Go for it.
17 million pounds.
17 million pounds. Have we any advances on this side of the room? 23 million. Come on. 24.
Is it higher or lower?
It's higher. 47. We're back to him. He's on it. He's on a mission. He's on a mission. This is mine. I can feel it. Have we got any advances on this side of the room? We're up to, what was it, 47 million, did you say? 100. Oh, I've broken his thing. Do you want to have a look? the guy that was in charge of the whole project, it was a great quote. I did not win that job, just so that we're clear. I would not be here tonight if I'd won that job. What he said was, when they've been developing the site, they said, we found ordnance from World War II, so unexploded bombs, and we've got Japanese knotweed. And then he goes, we can deal with the bombs. ... And it was if it hadn't been funded by the public purse, absolutely would not have happened because of the cost. It was huge. Well, you can see for yourself, 70 million quid. It's a couple that's going to buy a couple of pints in that bar. So what is Japanese knotweed? So I suppose why I emphasise that is because what I'm trying to show is it can be very expensive to deal with. But what we're going to touch on in a bit is exactly how much the average cost is for a residential property. Because we're talking about a site that was acres, and we're talking about a site that was filled with Japanese knotweed. Hundreds of thousands of tons of soil had to come out of that site. So what is Japanese knotweed? Admittedly, right, she was small. She was only 5'2". But look at the Japanese knotweed. It's huge. Now keep in mind, any gardeners in the room? Fabulous. So what's a perennial? Comes every year. Japanese knotweed is a perennial. So it dies down in the winter and it grows back every year. So look at that. That's about 2.5, 3 metres tall. That wasn't there in February that year. That picture was taken at the end of July. And it's grown that fast. It'll grow 40 mil a day. Which you think, oh, that's not very much. But that means like in a week, it can be up here. And in a month, it can be up here. So it grows fantastically quickly. In fact, Japanese knotweed, as its namesake, from Japan, and in its native habitat, it will grow on the side of volcanoes. So the volcano will explode, magma will flow down the side of the mountain, burning off all of the vegetation, including our lovely Japanese knotweed. And what will happen is that magma will obviously burn all of the plants, but also it will burn into the soil, obviously, because of the heat, phenomenal heat, as we can imagine. But the Japanese knotweed, the rhizomes, because they're not roots, they're rhizomes, because they store nutrients, which means they're basically self-sufficient. It's not like a root of a tree, where you cut the tree down, the roots are in the ground, they'll just rot away. The rhizomes contain nutrients so they can carry on growing, and they can go into a dormant state for up to 20 years. So once the magma has solidified, the Japanese knotweed that might be 1 metre, 1.5 metres, 2 metres deep, it will start growing. It will then grow up, it will break through the magma and colonise the side of the volcano. So you can understand why mortgage lenders don't like it. But it's very pretty. Brought into the country by the Victorians as a specimen plant. You know, green stems, purple speckles, large luxuriant green leaves, flowers at the end of the summer when actually there's not a lot of things in flower, high amount of pollen and nectar, really good for bees. Really good, and it creates like a little pseudo woodland for invertebrates and stuff. But it can cause structural damage to concrete, drains, etc. It's an interesting graph. I don't know if there's any mathematical people out there in the room. Roughly, as a percentage, or anything, that tells you, if you need to know some figures, but that tells you how many properties are affected by Japanese knotweed in the UK. So out of 100, how many will be affected? We haven't got the brightest group here. You're the accountant, you should be able to work it out. It's roughly 1 house in 20 is affected by Japanese knotweed. Now, that's a lot. When you think about it, that's a lot. And I can see some of you thinking, really? But that's the latest figures. Now, what you've got to remember is, if you've got some Japanese knotweed, say you've got it in a town or in the back of a row of terraced houses, the rhizomes can be up to 7 metres either way. So you could easily have rhizomes affecting 2 properties to the right, 2 to the left. And obviously with terraced houses, they often have that gully at the back. And so it could be affecting 3 to 6 houses quite easily. But also keep in mind, and this is important, should we talk about it now? Yeah, why not? Anybody sold a house recently or bought a house recently? Yeah? Yeah, a few of you. Lovely. TA6 form, property information form. So there's a question on there that specifically talks about Japanese knotweed. Is the property affected by Japanese knotweed? Now, if you take anything away from this 20-minute talk, this is the thing to take away. You've got 3 options. Yes, the property's affected. No, it's not. I don't know. So if they've put yes, then obviously you would expect to see things like a management plan, you'd want transferable guarantees, you'd want to potentially go back and renegotiate on the price even. If they put no, there's no Japanese knotweed. Now, this is the key thing. The guidance notes say you must be certain there is no Japanese knotweed. So let's work this out. So it's not just, thank you, it's not just Japanese knotweed within the boundaries of the property, it's within 3 metres of the boundary, and it's not just visible growth, it's the root, it's the rhizome. So, Chris is our Japanese knotweed. Here we go. Wave like a plant. Right, so our boundary, let's say our boundary is roughly here, 3 metres. Chris is a visible piece of Japanese knotweed. There is no question of, we have to declare the property's got Japanese knotweed because he's within 3 metres. We can see the Japanese knotweed within 3 metres of the boundary. What happens if we go to 6 metres? Do you think we still have to declare it?
You're going to say yes?
Yeah.
Because you can see it.
No, not because you can see it. Remember what I said about the rhizomes?
7 meters.
Up to 7 metres. So if Chris is over there, and I'm only 6 metres or 7 metres from Chris, I still have to say it. What about if I'm 10 metres or just under 10 metres from Chris?
Still, no.
So if the rhizomes are 7 metres, we've got 7 metres, so rhizomes roughly stop, let's say, here, gentleman with the green T-shirt, and then we'd have to come another 3 metres before we could say, no, the property is not affected by Japanese knotweed. And that's quite a distance when you look at that. That is quite a distance, but that's what, to be safe. Let's say you put no. Anybody have any ideas what the cost is for misrepresentation if they proved that Japanese knotweed was within 3 metres of your property? Average claim in the UK at the moment? And there's a load of solicitors up in Liverpool, don't know why Liverpool, that'll do it on a no-win, no-fee basis, because it's a guaranteed win. £32,000 average claim for misrepresentation. So if you put no on your TA6 form, you'd better be sure that there isn't any Japanese knotweed.
Solicitors advise you never ever put no.
Yes.
I don't know. So if I was buying a property and I wasn't experiencing Japanese knotweed, I'd be saying, you've put I don't know, well, I want some further proof. So either you're going to pay for a survey or I'm going to pay for a survey, but somebody's paying for a survey so that I can sue somebody if there is Japanese knotweed there.
What's the cost of a survey?
They're not that expensive. Normally between 300 quid and 600 quid, depending on the size of the property. You know, what's the process? So normally somebody like me would come out, we'd have a look at not only the actual garden, we'd actually look over each of the boundaries. And what you're paying for is, you're paying for the 25 years experience, to be honest, and the £5 million professional indemnity insurance. So that if we miss it, we never have. That's not true. We didn't miss it.
5 acres and 3 acres of woodland.
Then that's going to cost you more than 600 quid. You'd have to speak to our office. But absolutely. But remember, if you... Right, this is a slight detour, okay? So if you're buying a property, we'll touch... In fact, no, we'll touch on this later. Because if you're going to buy something like that, buy it in a limited company because there's a tax advantage. You already own it? Oh, that's lovely. That's lovely. I wish my parents had money. I've got to pay for everything that they have. So, right. What, sorry? Oh, at least Himalayan balsam, although it's classed as an invasive weed, doesn't cause any damage, does it? You can pull that out by your hand. Get your son to pull it out if you've got one. So you are the son, and you have to pull it out. There it is. Right. So I've pressed the button a couple of times. So that's the average depreciation in the UK. Okay. Now we've got £120,000 knocked off a property for a client that had Japanese knotweed. Let me give you an example now, or a really nice scenario. This is real life. Notting Hill, London. Nice area, really good area. Ground floor apartment, immaculate. And I do mean beautiful, like showroom quality. With a garden that had Japanese knotweed on the neighbouring property within 3 metres of the boundary. 1.4 million, or just a fraction under, 1.395 million, something like that. Cash buyer, lady, How much did she get knocked off the property? 250,000. Any other advances? Or less, gentlemen? How much? 50. 50%. So about 750,000. Yeah, okay. Anything else? Any other options? Because the answer will shock you. She didn't get a penny knocked off. And what? That is a great reaction. That's a great reaction. It's like, what the hell? You just told me 10%. I'm going to... So, thank you. What I've just said, it's very much, it's like the old adage, supplier and demand. So this lady had been looking for 2 years for a property like this, she said, because she wanted to get something knocked off. She really did. And who wouldn't? She was a cash buyer. And she said for 2 years she couldn't find anything to this standard in this area. It's just exactly what she wanted, with the good school, you know, the lovely area, Notting Hill, whatever, everything that goes with that type of thing. And that obviously the fact that it had a garden in London as well. There was also 2 other buyers waiting, both cash buyers. Both were happy to pay the asking price.
No mortgage, therefore, is relevant.
Yeah. And we're going to touch on the fact that even if there was a mortgage, it could be irrelevant anyway. So, but we'll touch on that in a moment. So what I'm saying is, if you've got a property with Japanese knotweed, and you want to maximise your value, as in don't want to lose 10%, then make sure it's in a, you know, in the best area possible. Now you can't control the area, but you can make sure it's the best house on the street. Make sure it's nicely decorated. Make sure it's all done up so that the person that goes to it thinks this is lovely. This is exactly what I want. You know, and you'll minimise the amount of money that if you've got a scummy house in a scummy area, I'm sorry, you could easily be losing 15-20%. No problem at all. We work with some developers up in Cheshire and Crewe, and they typically offer 20 grand minimum less on any property that's between 100 and 150,000. And they're all driving very nice cars. They do very well out of it, because what they want to do is they want to make money on day one. Now, before we start these slides, and I've talked about Japanese knotweed, first colonizer of volcano. In the 25 years plus that I've been doing this, we've only come across one property where Japanese knotweed physically damaged the house. Okay? And if you go on the internet, there's a plethora of fabulous stories about my house is worth nothing, my house is going to be falling down because of Japanese knotweed, and all that. Most of it's rubbish, or it's very, very, very extreme. I'll tell you about the one case. Terraced houses, 120 plus years old, Japanese knotweed on the top of an embankment that went down to a railway. The Japanese knotweed was growing on the embankment because the railway people, they planted it there to hold the embankments together. There wasn't really access to the embankment. Basically, there wasn't really a back garden. It just was there, the back row of the houses. They'd got a contractor in to deal with the Japanese knotweed. He'd done a good job. He'd killed the Japanese knotweed. Well done him. Excellent. What type of foundation do terraced houses have that are 150 odd years old? Roughly. If you're lucky, you'll have 12 inches of foundation. It's probably more like 4 inches. So the Japanese knotweed had literally grown all along the back of the house for decades and decades and decades. It had formed mounds, and because it had grown underneath the foundation, when the contractor had killed it, that had basically rotted away, creating voids underneath the wall of the house, and it had to be underpinned. That is the only time I've seen Japanese knotweed actually do proper damage.
It's actually the eradication of knotweed that damaged the house.
But it had to go. It had to be dealt with. It had to be dealt with. These types of things are more example. This is a builder's yard to Travis Perkins. The Japanese knotweed had come through the gap between the two concrete panels. They weighed 2.5 tons each, and it had pushed them apart by about 35 mil. That is an old retaining wall, what I would call a proper retaining wall, made out of engineering brick, not the rubbish, what they call engineering brick now. 3 skins of brick. It had literally broken, cracked it from here all the way down, and you can see it's literally growing through there. But again, it had been left for decades to do its own thing. It hadn't been maintained, hadn't got somebody cutting it back or spraying it or treating it. It had just been left to do its own thing. Student accommodation in Stoke-on-Trent comes up every year. Most years I take a picture of it, and then in the autumn they cut it down. Now this guy I actually felt sorry for. South Wales, near Swansea, commercial unit. He'd done a great job. By far and away, the best looking commercial unit on that industrial estate. He'd really done a spot on job. You know, at the very beginning, Chris talked about how knowledge is one of those core pillars. So important to be knowledgeable, so important to have some type of information to support your decisions on. He didn't realise it was Japanese knotweed, so when he came to do the car park, literally just got the digger to scrape the hardcore flat, rolled it, and then got the tarmackers in. That was in May. And it was just it was coming up all over the place. So, a bit of a pain, to be honest. We recommended chemical treatment because obviously he didn't want to rip up his brand new tarmac. But not an ideal scenario by any stretch of the imagination. What should have happened is, if it had been identified, it should have been dug out and then a membrane put around the barrier, which we can get a 50-year guaranteed membrane, because there's actually Japanese knotweed all over this industrial estate. So, and that would have kind of basically protected his site. It just comes through tarmac like wet tissue paper, to be honest. Concrete, if it's like a 9-inch concrete pad, it's highly, highly, highly unlikely to come through that. It's far more likely to come up the sides. But if it's only a couple of inches of concrete poured like on the back of a terraced house, a yard, then but even here, you see, there's a crack in the concrete already, and that's what it's exploiting. So even there, it's exploiting that. So, happy for you to sit in my seat, just don't knock my drink over. Hi, how are you? Are you okay? Now I've embarrassed you completely, haven't I? So very quickly, because we've only got a few minutes. Japanese knotweed in the spring, very much looks like asparagus. Japanese knotweed in the summer, 2.5 meters tall, heart-shaped leaves. There's brochures floating around, so if you're interested, take a brochure. And it has these lovely flowers at the end of summer, which, as I said, are really good for bees. In the winter, you can identify it even in the winter because, as the lady at the back said, it's a perennial, so it dies back. So the leaves go from the green to the yellow and browns, the drop off. The leaves will not produce new plants. The only way to produce a new plant is a stem cutting, where it has to have 2 nodules, or part of the rhizome, which only has to be the size of your thumb, and that will then produce a new plant. So I used to bring some Japanese knotweed along to show people, and then, you know, any ex-partners that they wanted to upset, they could have someone take it and throw it in the garden at the end of on the way home. So it always went. I was like selling weed in the toilets. So has these the stems are brown, they're dead. It's only the rhizome, the root, that's alive in the winter. The actual stems are dead. Any surveyors in the room? No? Okay. So when you have, if a property is surveyed, then they are told to go and look for Japanese knotweed, and they're actually meant to go to a first floor window and look for Japanese knotweed, not only in your garden, but also in the surrounding gardens. It's often surveyors that will get sued first if they miss the Japanese knotweed. Financial benefits. Back to this gentleman. Right. So if you buy a property in a limited company, or have the work done through a limited company, you can claim 150% of the cost against your corporation tax. So that's the government's way of encouraging limited companies to deal with Japanese knotweed. So if it costs you 10 grand, you can claim 15 grand's worth of costs against your corporation tax. It comes under land remediation relief, which, as an accountant, most accountants don't know about it. So you'd have to tell them, and then they'll go away and research it. There's a few hoops to jump through, but it's well worth doing. Well worth doing. There is also a fork, a stick. If you deal with Japanese knotweed inappropriately, so let's say you just dig up the Japanese knotweed and throw it in a lay-by, or you throw it on a brownfield side, or you throw it in a skip, £5,000 fine for a member of the public, £20,000 fine if you're a company, and up to 6 months in prison for the director of the company. So the government really don't want you to be just picking up and slinking it somewhere. So, right, now somebody said about mortgages. So it's a very much common misnomer that you cannot get a mortgage on a property that's affected by Japanese knotweed. That's not true. But what you do need to do is you need to have these. So you need to have it surveyed by a PCA qualified surveyor. You need to have a management plan in place. And you need to have that paid for and a 10-year insurance-backed guarantee. And if you don't have to have the first treatment carried out. They like it, but if you're buying that property in winter, there's no Japanese knotweed to treat. So you can't have any treatment. You need the point 1, 2, 4 and 5. And if you've got those 4 boxes ticked, most mortgage lenders now are happy to give a mortgage. Okay, so that's that. That's our sister company. If any of you are doing extensions or building properties, then that's all that type of stuff. Just Google it. Any questions? Is that the time?
Sorry, I thought I switched it off.
It's all right.
How long does it take to get rid of it?
So for chemical treatment, it's normally a 3-year programme. Normally 3 visits per year for those 3 years, 2 years of monitoring, and then the 10-year insurance-backed guarantee kicks in. If you're buying a property or selling a property with Japanese knotweed, the mortgage lender will want the insurance-backed guarantee, so we can get the insurance-backed guarantee like on day 1, but you have to pay for the whole thing.
Cost for like a terrace house or something?
Okay, great question. So anybody want to hazard a guess? How much would it cost for a management plan to deal with Japanese knotweed? So 3 years worth of treatments and a 10-year insurance-backed guarantee. 5 grand, 10 grand, 7, 25. I'll come and happily do work for you every day of the week. So the average cost for a normal house, 3 to 5 grand. Which is not much. You're right. It's not much. Everybody thinks it's like 15, 20, 30,000. It's not that much. But we've been doing it for a long time. And don't get me wrong. We've got 10 grand, 20 grand, 50 grand jobs. Don't get me wrong. But for a typical house, not just a terrace house, just for a typical average house, 3 to 5 grand.
Even if it's 7 metres away,
What, sorry?
will that management plan get rid of?
So if there's Japanese knotweed, let's say you've got Japanese knotweed and it's right on the boundary, so you've got some on this garden and some on this garden, we would treat all of it to eradicate all of it, because you couldn't guarantee it if you only treated it here and then it just grew back next year from the neighbour's side. So we would then treat it all.
Would the neighbour always say yes or whatever?
So the neighbour always does say yes, or more often than not, if they don't want to pay for it, you'll just hear radio silence, and then we just send them a letter saying, we're coming to treat your Japanese knotweed. You know, any problems, please get in touch. But we've had, what a better question is what happens if it's on the neighbour's side and I can't sell my house because of their Japanese knotweed? That's the better question. And I always say there's more than one way to skin a cat. That's what my boss always used to say, because he was a nasty person. He really was. So with regards to that, so let's say your neighbour had the Japanese knotweed, Emma. It is Emma, isn't it? Is it Emma? Yeah. And they refused to treat it, because it's not illegal to have Japanese knotweed growing in your garden, okay? But because it's within 3 metres, it's affecting you selling your property. So you pay to have their Japanese knotweed, you pay your 3 grand, and we come in and we deal with it, and you get your insurance-backed guarantee and your receipts, and you sell your property. They come to sell their house in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the line. And you notice, and this has happened, so we had an elderly gentleman, and the lady next door, Japanese knotweed was coming, he wanted to sell his house. He ended up not selling it, but he wanted to deal with the Japanese knotweed. She flat out refused. He was sure she was a prostitute. But it was a lovely area. But he was absolutely positive. We meet all sorts, we really do. And the lady came, and he phoned me up and said, hi, Jason, she's got the house on for sale. I said, great. So do you want me to phone the estate agent and tell them there's Japanese knotweed in the garden? Or do you want to? He goes, I'm going to do it. And he phoned the estate agent. Legally, they then have to declare there's Japanese knotweed affecting that property. So she literally, within 24 hours, was knocking on his door, asking for a copy of his paperwork. Because without that paperwork, she couldn't sell her house. And he was going, absolutely no problem at all sweetness and light. It's going to cost you 2.5 grand. And she had to pay it. She had to pay it because she couldn't sell a house because of that. And we got everything, we got her name put on the insurance-backed guarantee, and she was able to sell her house, and he was a lot happier because he had some money in his pocket.
If you're buying a 10-acre site of land, and that land potentially has Japanese knotweed on it,
Yeah.
but the development that's going onto that site is the big, decent, executive-sized houses. So
Yeah.
you've got lots of space in them. Would that affect if there is Japanese knotweed on it, would that affect the sale or the development, even if the Japanese
So if it was a development like that, I would probably recommend excavation, because it would be easier for you just to have it excavated. It's more
Specifically
where the Japanese knotweed was, and just literally take it away and get rid of it. There is a middle ground. So we did for one project where it was a big site, but there wasn't a lot of houses going on it. We actually excavated the Japanese knotweed because that was where the building was going, and we put that into an area that was classed as a green space. We piled it up, created a temporary bund, and then we treated it for the next 3 years in that area. And obviously the project went on for almost 2.5 years, so it was pretty well eradicated. Well, it was eradicated by the time they sold the first house, because we were brought in at the very, very beginning.
So the knock-on effect would be when you go to sell the property that's being developed.
If it was excavating, you wouldn't even, in theory, you wouldn't even have to declare it, because if you'd excavated, it's gone.
Okay, but from the point of view of purchasing the land, because it's just pre-built, then
Yeah.
it wouldn't make
So if you were buying some land with Japanese knotweed on, I would always be going in with an offer, because we've just said 92% of people will walk away from it. So I would always put in a reduced offer. And we bought a commercial site, and we probably got it 30 grand knocked off. It was about 210, I think we got it for 180,000. So great little commercial site. We were based there for a few years until we outgrew it, and then it's rented on a 10-year lease to actually one of the neighbouring businesses who needed some extra space. So great little investment.
Thanks very much.
No problem.
And applause.
I'll speak to you afterwards. Grab me afterwards. Thanks so much, Chris. Thank you.
Mic- the mic-